That you'll be returning your verdict on. Again, as along with the original stamp that I'll be reading from. You can feel free to write, take notes, mark on your copies if you choose to do so. This is cause number 122201718, the state of Texas versus Brandon Daniel. This is a court's charge on punishment. Members of the jury, we have found the defendant, Brandon Daniel, guilty of the offense of capital murder. You are instructed that the defendant shall be punished by imprisonment in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life without parole or by death. In order for the court to assess the proper punishment, the court submits two issues to you. Issue number one, whether there is a probability that the defendant would commit criminal acts of violence that would constitute a continuing threat to society. You shall answer issue number one, either yes or no. The prosecution has the burden of proving that the answer to issue number one should be yes, beyond a reasonable doubt. And if it fails to do so, you must answer issue number one, no. In deliberating on issue number one, you shall consider all evidence admitted at the guilt or innocence stage and the punishment stage, including evidence of the defendant's background or character, or the circumstances of the offense that militates for or mitigates against the imposition of the death penalty. You may not answer issue number one yes unless you agree unanimously. You may not answer issue number one no unless 10 or more jurors agree. The members of the jury need not agree on what particular evidence supports a negative answer to issue number one. If the jury answers issue number one yes, then you shall answer issue number two. Otherwise, do not answer issue number two. Issue number two, whether, taking into consideration all of the evidence, including the circumstances of the offense, the defendant's character and background, and the personal moral culpability of the defendant, there is a sufficient mitigating circumstance or circumstances to warrant that a sentence of life imprisonment rather than the death sentence be imposed. You shall answer issue number two either yes or no. You are instructed that you may not answer issue number two no unless you agree unanimously. You may not answer issue number two yes unless 10 or more jurors agree. The members of the jury need not agree on what particular evidence supports an affirmative finding on issue number two. You shall consider mitigating evidence to be evidence that a juror might regard as reducing the defendant's moral blameworthiness. If the defendant is sentenced to confinement for life without parole, he is ineligible for release from the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice on parole. You are instructed that our law provides that the defendant may testify in his own behalf if he chooses to do so. This, however, is a privilege accorded to a defendant, and in the event he chooses not to testify, that fact cannot be taken as a circumstance against him. Brandon Daniel has chosen not to testify, and you are instructed that you cannot and must not refer or allude to that fact throughout your deliberations, or take it into consideration for any purpose whatsoever as a circumstance against him. You have been permitted to take notes during the testimony in this case. In the event any of you took notes, you may rely on your notes during your deliberations. However, you may not share your notes with the other jurors, and you should not permit the other jurors to share their notes with you. You may, however, discuss the contents of your notes with the other jurors. You shall not use your notes as authority to persuade your fellow jurors. In your deliberations, give no more and no less weight to the views of a fellow juror just because that juror did or did not take notes. Your notes are not official transcripts. They are personal memory aids, just like the notes of the judge and the notes of the lawyers. Notes are valuable as a stimulant to your memory. On the other hand, you might make an error in observing, or you might make a mistake in recording what you have seen or heard. Therefore, you are not to use your notes as authority to persuade fellow jurors of what the evidence was during the trial. Occasionally, during jury deliberations, a dispute arises as to the testimony presented. If this should occur in this case, you shall inform the court and request that the court read the portion of disputed testimony to you from the official transcript. You shall not rely on your notes to resolve the dispute because those notes, if any, are not official transcripts. The dispute must be settled by the official transcript, for it is the official transcript rather than any juror's notes upon which you must base your determination of the facts and ultimately your verdict in this case. After argument of counsel, you will retire to the jury room to deliberate. Any further communication must be in writing, signed by your foreperson, and submitted through the bailiff to the court. When you have reached a decision, you will use the attached forms to indicate your answers to the special issues. Your foreperson should sign the certification attesting to your special verdicts reflected in your answers to the special issues. I will sign and date it when I send it into the jury room. The next form entitled Special Issues. Now, bearing in mind the foregoing instructions, you will answer the following issues. Issue number 1, do you find from the evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt, that there is a probability that the defendant would commit criminal acts of violence that would constitute a continuing threat to society? In your special verdict, you will answer yes or no. And then there is the word answer with the blank. That will be where you'll be inserting your answer to that question. If your answer to issue number 1 is yes, then you will answer issue number 2. Otherwise, you will not answer issue number 2. Issue number 2 reads, take into consideration all of the evidence, including the circumstances of the offense, the defendant's character and background, and the personal moral culpability of the defendant. Do you find that there is a sufficient mitigating circumstance or circumstances to warrant that a sentence of life imprisonment rather than a death sentence be imposed? In your special verdict, you will answer yes or no. Again, answer, and then you write your answer in the blank. The next item is the certification. We, the jury, having agreed upon the answers to the foregoing issues, return the same into court as our verdict. Your presiding juror would sign and date and time that on your behalf. Again, the attorneys will be arguing the viewpoints of the evidence to you. The state carries the burden on the question number 1, and they will continue to do so, and they argue first and last. Is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may do so.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel for defense, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to go over this charge with you because each of you sat down in that stand and we asked you specifically about this charge, about the questions, and about what would be submitted to you. And that's what's happening now. You've heard a lot of evidence. You've heard it from a lot of people. But shockingly, everything that you've heard that could be considered to his benefit has come from him. He did not testify in this case, and you cannot use that against him. But what you can use is the information provided from him through his host of experts, through his ex-girlfriend. That's his information. And it's manipulative. It cannot be trusted because it's all his grand design. You see it in his letters starting early on in his incarceration, in his phone calls. You see it in the jail visits. He's running this show. He starts off by, we're going to go with the Ambien and Xanax defense. That's shot down when the lab report comes back. So now we're going to shift more to Xanax. But let's throw in some depression. All of that history came from him. No one talked to his mother. No one talked to his father other than 15 minutes when Dr. Scott talked to him, and then the father terminated the visit and didn't get any information from him regarding his child. They didn't talk to Jenna. They based their assessment solely on information provided by him, by the man who has the most to gain or lose, by the man who was manipulating every person who came up here and testified on his behalf. All of that has to be viewed with that bias that even his experts talk about. I find it fascinating that one of the things he says in his interview, hours after this happened, is when Jenna broke up with me, I went into a downward spiral. Those were his words. How many people sat here and used the word downward spiral? Everyone who testified on his behalf said he went into a downward spiral because he told them to. That's where that comes from. His depression. He couldn't tell our expert why he was depressed, what symptoms he had of depression. He said, I'm depressed. And then he laid out the clinical words that he's supposed to say, but he couldn't explain them because he wasn't depressed. Listen to the facts of his childhood. I had some friends. I had some angst that I didn't have more. Whose childhood is that not descriptive of? That's what childhood is. He's out smoking marijuana with friends. He's riding motorcycles with friends. That's what kids do. That's not depressed. The only thing out of the ordinary with this person is his fascination with Columbine as a young kid, his fascination with the Boston bombing, his fascination with murder. And you see that from that very early age, in those early school records. He's fascinated with that. He thinks he's cool because he runs from the police on his motorcycle. That's how he gains his fame, his notoriety. He brags about it. He bragged about it to his boss at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That is a strange person to brag about running from the police on a motorcycle to. Your boss. Guy who works for the government. Hey boss, you know what's cool? That's not normal. That's not what most people get their self-worth from. But he's different. He gets his self-worth from taking pictures of himself with his gun, holding it sideways. That's not someone who's documenting the ownership of a weapon for insurance purposes. That's someone who thinks it's really, really cool that I have a gun. He blew a hole in his own ceiling and took a picture of it to see the damage because he thought that was cool. He threatened suicide to Jenna because he thought he could get her back. Whatever hatched this plan, he hatched a plan in April of 2012 to get famous. And the only way he knew how, he told his roommate, let's go hit a convenience store. Roommate wasn't part of it. But that's where this all started. He took a gun with him, a gun that every witness who testified said he never took that gun anywhere. He says it in his interrogation. I never took that gun anywhere except to go shoot it in the mountains in Colorado. The only time he ever carried it was this day. And the one part of his story, despite his IQ, despite his intelligence, the one part of the story that he still couldn't get out through his experts is why. You remember one of his doctors sat there and said, he told me he took the gun in case of an altercation. But he couldn't explain what that meant. For 22 months, He's pondered upon that and still cannot give any logical reason why he took a loaded .380 to Walmart. Because the only explanation is he took a loaded .380 to Walmart to shoot somebody. You don't take a loaded .380 to Walmart in case you get caught shoplifting. You take a loaded .380 to Walmart to kill somebody. And that's what he did. The evidence in this case is not only the loaded .380, but it's loaded with hollow points. Rounds of ammunition designed to cause the most damage. He had an extra magazine of hollow point rounds. Rounds designed to cause the most damage. Ladies and gentlemen, you can look at the facts and you can look at the circumstances and determine what you believe was going through his head on April 6, 2012. Even his experts aren't consistent with what his recollection of that is. His first doctor, who was here to testify on the abuse and addiction issues, he didn't remember anything. He woke up in the jail with no recollection of what happened. But yet Dr. Scott testified that he told me, using Dr. Scott's words, that he had his gun, he couldn't tell me why he took it. He saw the officer, he ran, and he turned and shot the officer. And I asked him, did he know it was a police officer? Yes, he did. The information that he gives is determined on who he's giving it to. The only information about 3 concussive events in his life was, ironically enough, given to the only doctor who testified to the effects of concussive events. Dr. Scott could only talk about the 1 concussive event that he was aware of in his 5 visits with the defendant. So it's that temperance of information, that withholding of information, that using information that makes you realize you can't trust that information. He knew what he was doing on April 6th. He spent how many minutes in that store? Or on the property? Close to 30 minutes there. He's wandering the aisles, he's putting stuff in bags, he's putting stuff in his backpack. If his goal at that time was to shoplift food, wouldn't he have left when he passed Sean McCarthy at the water stand thing? Instead of handing him those bags and walking to his motorcycle and coming back in, he would have left right then and there if that's what he wanted to do. And it was odd because Mr. Garlow, William Garlow, the person who administered first aid, kind of alluded to it. Shoplifters usually don't draw this much attention to themselves. He did a lot in that store to attract the attention of the people in that store. He knew Archie Jordy was following him. There's times when they pass within feet of each other in those aisles. He watches Archie Jordy go by, and then he turns and starts back again. He was trying to gain attention for a goal. And he's in that store for all that time, all those minutes, dealing with passing Archie Jordy. Lincoln Lemaire is in the store. There's customers in the store. There's other associates in the store. But it's not until that moment in time when a police officer walks in that he decides it's time to do anything. Is that coincidence? That's for you to decide. But it's certainly not consistent with what we know about him. As soon as Officer Padron walks into that store, as soon as he gets up to that place where those water displays were, that's when he makes a run for it. Passes the officer, and a foot chase ensues. And ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that at that point his intention was not escape. His intention was not to flee. His intention was far more sinister. And you may think, how can you ever say that? How can you prove that? And I don't have to. The video proves that. When he's running at that point in time, you can watch it again and again. Watch it as the officer steps on his shoe. He's not running in an effort to escape. He's not running in an effort to maximize his speed. He's got his hands in front of him. That's not how you run in an effort to escape. That's how you run in an effort to ready your weapon to cause damage. And that's what he was doing when he went down on the floor of the Walmart. It's also indicative of that because as soon as they hit the ground, I mean, not even within seconds, that first shot goes off, going to the pocket and causing the confetti, and all the store people thought, wow, that's weird, it's a fake gun. Within seconds, he didn't have time to get on the ground, reach for the gun, pull the gun, rack the gun. He hit the ground basically in a firing position, and he did. This is someone who gains his self-worth through the evil that he does. That's not just me saying it. He talks in his school records about Columbine. He talks in the jail letters, phone calls about the evil events that have occurred. But he also talks about himself. He talks about selling his story within weeks of this happening. About the same time as this ginned up letter is apparently being written, he's talking to Jenna about how he can sell his story. He's telling his mother about how it's all a framework and he can get out by Xanax and Ambien. He talks about, I'm famous now. He talks about, when I go to prison, based on my crime, I'm a top-tier inmate. That's a source of pride for him. He talks about selling his artwork, bragging about getting the most money ever in the Travis County Jail based on his crime. That's not someone who has any remorse. Dr. Morrow read to you the definition of psychopathy. Someone with a flat affect. Someone with no remorse. Someone with no empathy. Someone who's manipulative. Someone who has no concern for the rules or the feelings of others. Everything except what came through him is consistent with that. And there's nothing more telling as to the behavior of April 6th that he is a future danger, and there's not one good reason not to sentence him to death.
Proceed, Your Honor. Amen.
Mr. Bishop's argument about Brandon Daniel hatching some plan to be famous would not be ridiculous had it not been the fact that he was intoxicated so much by the presence of alprazolam Xanax that 7 hours after the incident, he had 0.16 milligrams of it in his system. You guys saw the video at Walmart. You guys saw how he looked in the back of that police car. You saw how he reacted. The trick to that argument for them is, we don't want you to consider intoxication because we know that it's a mitigating factor. So we have to come up with this story about him hatching some plan to become famous in order for you to think he's a monster so you can kill him. That's what they're telling you. And he talks about Columbine. Remember, the context in which he talked about Columbine was he was going to commit suicide on the anniversary of Columbine. He doesn't say, I'm going to shoot up a school on the anniversary of Columbine so I can be just like the shooters. He says, I'm going to commit suicide on the anniversary of Columbine. Is that somebody who wants to be famous or somebody who's depressed? I didn't mean to start talking to you about that. I just thought it was so ridiculous that it doesn't bear mention or merit. But I wanted to talk to you about what Texas sentencing law actually says. Texas sentencing law, remember, never requires you, a jury who has convicted somebody of capital murder, to impose the death penalty or to answer those questions in the way that the death penalty will be imposed. That's what I want to talk to you about. Because it requires you to look at all the evidence that is presented, weigh it as a whole, consider his entire life. and all the circumstances that we brought before you in order to make your decision. Remember, you convicted him of capital murder. At the very least, as I said to you 4 days ago, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. He will not leave ever again. He will leave the next time in a coffin, long after his father is dead, long after his mother is dead, and probably when his sister is an old woman. That's the life that Brandon Daniel has in front of him. Now, you heard from some prison expert that came over here and talked to you about our maximum security prisons in Texas, and quite frankly, by the time Mr. Cobb and him got talking, I was ready for him to show the pictures of the pool and the tennis courts. He made it sound so good to be on level 3 general population. That's a maximum security prison in the state of Texas, where hardened criminals go and do time, where people who have murdered people go and do time. It's not club fed. It's not a day camp. So now we have to answer 2 questions together. And those 2 questions are whether he is a future danger and whether there is mitigating circumstances that warrant a life sentence. I'm going to talk to you only about future danger, and Mr. Hunt's going to come up here and talk to you about the second part of it. To answer each question, remember that answer to each question is based on your own personal decision, an individual decision, an individual moral decision. It's not subject to negotiation. In other words, when we talked about jury selection, I know you've seen these slides before, you're probably tired of seeing them. When we talked about it in jury selection, we talked about how that was your decision and your decision alone as to how you answered each question. It's true you have to go back there and deliberate and come to a decision, but how you make your decision is based on your own individual moral judgment. And you should demand that decision, however it is that you decide to vote, be respected by the other members of the jury. And I think we all promise, or you all promised in our questioning, to do just that. That I will make this decision, my own individual and moral decision, and I will stand by my decision. And I think you all agreed, and it sounded to me, or you wouldn't be on this jury, that you were strong enough to do that, if that's what you believed. So it's one jury room, all right, but it's 12 voting booths. And you get back there and you vote your own conscience. So we got this question then, that you and I are going to talk about. Future danger. I've broken it up here because it made sense to me that way. Is there a probability that the defendant would commit criminal acts of violence that would constitute a continuing threat to society? And they have to prove that to you beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to prove to you that Brandon Daniel is capable and will probably commit criminal acts of violence. And Mr. Cobb told you that he was going to bring you evidence that was going to show a pattern of that he was going to convince you of that. Well, let's talk about what they did bring you. They brought you Carissa Marino, a girl that Brandon Daniel threatened on a playground when he was 11 years old. 11. As young as my youngest child, some of you probably have children that age. So what they're telling you is, we want you to judge him by conduct and use conduct that's a stupid comment that an 11-year-old makes right now to kill him. That's what they're saying about that evidence. But what's interesting about it is, if you remember when she was on the stand and Mr. Cobb asked her, with her statement right in front of him, knowing the answer to that question, he's asked her, did he ever say he was sorry to you? And she answered, no, he did not. He has that statement right in front of him. He doesn't correct that answer for her. He passes her and lets that linger. It wasn't until Mr. Hunt asked her, well, wait a minute, Have you seen your statement? Yes. Doesn't he say he's sorry? See, that's where what they talk to you about begins. Because throughout this, as we go through it, there's going to be a pattern, all right, but it's going to be a pattern by them to deceive you, because they're not really lying to you. They're just not telling you the whole truth. They're not really hiding evidence, but they're kind of not only telling you about part of it. And one of the interesting things that Mr. Bishop said that I wrote down was, the withholding of information makes you unable to trust it. And I'm not just talking about Carissa Marino. I'm not just talking about her. But let me address this fight that he had when he was 14. If we're going to start telling people, little boys, that have fights when they're 14, and we're going to say, and we're going to use that against you later on in life, and we're going to lock you up and subject you to the death penalty, well, you might as well start building more prisons, because you're going to be locking up a lot of kids that have fights when they're 14. Is that really a pattern of violence? He ran from the police. Well, he ran from the police, but when he ran from the police officer said to you, and they mentioned many incidences, but they brought one single incident. So he tells you, well, I was running from the police, and he ran from the police, all right, but the police officer told you, no way I could have caught him from a standstill.
Where do you want to have a hold on for a second?
The officer told you, no way I could have caught him on one of those cross rockets from a standstill. He went on further to say, no way you could have even caught him if you were even going his speed, because it was so fast. Those bikes are so fast, you can't catch him. But what did Brandon do? He stopped for Officer Templeton. Didn't stop for this officer they brought, but he stopped for the other officer they brought. See, they just tell you half the story and not all of it. Then they look at his DWI marijuana arrest, because, you know, they say that's a proof of a future violent act that he's capable of. Was he respectful? Was he cooperative? That's how both the officers testified to. He was compliant, respectful. He did what they asked him to do. And they're going to say, oh, well, if you're compliant and respectful, you get out of things. That's what they're implying that he's saying. He got arrested both times. He didn't get out of anything. He got a ticket and arrested on that running from arrest from the police officers. He didn't get out of anything, and he was each time compliant and respectful. So then we get to where it really gets a little hairy for them, because they start telling you about this hooch that he made. And then they tell you about Benadryl. Sure, he did those things. He violated the rules of the jail. Let me tell you about this note from this guard that this guard found, Officer Roddy found. He says, I found this note, and it said all these bad things about each guard, and it tracked all our movements. Officer Ferguson, Officer Krim, Officer Payton, Officer Long, and Officer Lowe all came and told you, if I found a note like that that said what you just described to me, I would have seized that note and turned it over and wrote a report. Where is that note? Because if Mr. Cobb had it and Mr. Bishop had it, don't you know they would have put it on here and put it on that screen right there so you could see it. And you know they watched Brandon like a hawk. You know every single thing he did was recorded and documented because they wanted to use it later. Every single incident. That note doesn't exist, or it'd be right here in evidence in front of you. Who of you doubts that? That would be important. That would be crucial. Then they talk about these coded letters. And again, I'm not sure which one of them put that witness up there. They talked about this coded letter because, oh, he's writing these secret codes, and he's trying to escape, and he's planning all these devious things by these secret codes. And they say, so, officer, you found this coded letter. That's right. And it had an encryption code. That's right. But they didn't ask him the other question. What did the letter say? They left that for me to ask. What did the letter say? Again, they're just withholding just a little bit of information. Just a little bit. And what did the letter say? I love you, Mom. That's what the letter said. They didn't ask him that because they knew what the answer would be. Oh, I don't even know how to begin with Luis Escalante. Or maybe I do know how to begin. I'll begin by telling you that you can't trust a word that man says. He's a liar. He got up on this witness stand right now, and he told you Brandon Daniel and Troy Williams were discussing an escape plan whereby they were going to somehow manipulate the court system so they could get their court dates together, and Brandon Daniel was going to have one of his friends or relatives come into the courtroom with a weapon and shoot up the entire courtroom so they could escape. It's exactly what he told you. And I asked him, Mr. Escalante, did you tell that exactly as you said it? Did you tell that to Officer Krim and Officer Ferguson? And he said, yes, I did. And I showed him the reports. He says, man, I can't believe they didn't write that down. I don't know why it's not in there. I said it just like that, man, that's messed up, kind of what he said. I can't believe they didn't say that. But it wasn't in their reports. He didn't say that. Then he said, well, I didn't say anything about passing a spoon. Did they call Officer Krim and Officer Ferguson to tell you that he said that? No. I had to call them under their subpoena so they could come over here and tell you Luis Escalante never told us anything like that. What he did tell us was something entirely different. That Troy Williams was going to overpower a guard and take his keys to help him and Brandon escape. But it wasn't what Luis Escalante said. They didn't bring those two officers to testify because they knew that what they said would not match what Mr. Escalante said. Because they got in bed with Mr. Escalante and had to live with his pleas, and they didn't want anybody to come up here and refute what he said. If it sounds like I'm a little mad about that, it's because I am. Because what they're asking you to do is to help them kill another man. They want you to take a man's life, and they bring you that kind of evidence to help do it. So Mr. Escalante is a man, and you heard on the telephone conversation, who is willing to assist them in extinguishing a man's life from this planet in the exchange for 90 days off his sentence. 90 days. Now, it's true Mr. Bishop never told him, I'm going to get you 90 days off your sentence. And it's true Detective Fugit never told him that. But what did he say? I left with that impression. And he calls his mom and tells him, hey, the detective was here, and I think I'm going to get that 90, hopefully I'll get that 90 days taken off. Officer Kroger comes and testifies. Personally, Officer Kroger, I think, is a good man. I feel bad for him because he was the first one there. And I hope he's okay later on. But remember back at Guilt Innocence, and they laid this impression to you, actually Mr. Cobb, they kind of let it hang out there that, oh, well, Jaime Padron, he had met the defendant on April 4th, 2012, 2 days before when he was investigating a suspicious vehicle thing. He left that out there for you. He didn't clean that up. He didn't bring Detective Fugit back to talk about the CAD report and how he couldn't substantiate that. Just left it out there. And again, just withheld just a little, enough to make it sound nefarious. Did they bring Officer Kroger to testify and explain that to you? Nope. We did. And what did he say? I'm 99% sure neither myself or Officer Padron talked to anybody that night. We certainly didn't talk to Brandon Daniel, and we certainly didn't talk to Dante Davis. Dante Davis is an interesting witness in the sense that they flew him all the way here from Virginia, and they put him on the stand, and once they didn't like what he was going to say, Mr. Cobb starts pointing out all the inconsistencies, almost impeaching him of his story. Well, you say you drank alcohol. The implication is that nobody ever said, that Brandon never said, and there's no alcohol in the system. He said, yes, that's what I said. So they bring this guy, they don't like what he says, and then they start impeaching his testimony and calling him a liar. Which is why I pointed out to you, I didn't bring it. They did. They don't like the testimony, so they turn it around. But what he did say was interesting. I don't like Xanax. It makes me feel like a zombie, and I don't remember what I did. That was interesting. They didn't like that, so they turn on him. To me, probably their biggest deception, or attempt to be deceptive, is when they start talking about the suicide attempt he had in jail. Now, that suicide attempt for them has evolved. I mean, they've come to terms with that now because they know the medical evidence proves that he did. But Mr. Cobb told you at the beginning of opening arguments, he told you that he faked it, there was no blood, no drugs in his system. He told you that. Well, that's true, that there's no drugs in his system, if you look just at the toxicology report. But then, when you look at the medical testimony, how did they get that toxicology in the first place? Through Detective Fugit. Where's their medical doctor? Where's the ER doctor that treated Brandon and was going to testify that this suicide attempt was a fake? Where was that? They didn't bring Dr. Sabine, who's the medical doctor that treated him. It's in the records. They didn't bring him to testify about that. Why? Because he wouldn't have said that he faked the suicide attempt. He would have agreed that you couldn't fake elevated heart rate, tachycardia, right? That you couldn't fake respiratory arrest or distress. That you couldn't subject yourself to intubation unless you were darn near unconscious. He decompensated and he took the drugs that he said he took, because we know that because Dr. Scott was able to tell you he took a generic form of Haldol. It's generally prescribed in the jail, and I called the jail pharmacy and verified that's what they take. But then they've evolved their position now from, oh, he faked it, because they know they can't prove that now. They know there's no way they can prove it. So they've evolved that position now to, oh, he was just trying to get attention and move to a different cell, or move to a different place, or go to a better place like the hospital. That place that he enjoyed so much while he was unconscious on a respirator because he was intubated. So they can't prove it, so their position has evolved. You really, really should demand better evidence from your district attorney. It shouldn't be half-truths, innuendo, just a little bit of what's true and withholding other stuff when you're talking about taking a man's life. When you're talking about something that you can't take back, that's forever. Mr. Bishop said, when you withhold evidence or information, it makes you unable to trust that. But they're telling you, trust us. Trust us. He's a future danger. Trust us. You should answer that question yes. Trust us and the evidence that we brought you. Can you trust it? Are they so desperate that they would withhold these things from you? Is that really what they mean when they say we want the community to decide? Because the community should decide on all the facts, on everything. Look at each of the acts that they brought, even the ones that are not in dispute. Everything that he did when he was a child that they brought up, any kind of thefts, running from the police, marijuana, DWI. Look at all the bad things that nobody has disputed that Brandon did. Look at all those for a minute. And you might say, well, why do you want me to look at those? Because they're not good for you. I want you to look at those because none of those constituted a criminal act of violence. None of those. Each of the witnesses, even the jailers that we brought to talk to you about Brandon's conduct, told you it was not a problem. Do you really doubt that he could function in jail and not get into trouble? Do you really believe that anything that they've shown you equals some pattern that constitutes a criminal act of violence, and that he will commit criminal acts of violence and be a continuing threat to society? Do you believe that beyond a reasonable doubt? Has the evidence they brought you, does that really bear that out? If it does, then I don't know what it is I could have shown you, what it is different I could have done to show you that. There is no future danger here. None. Answer the question. No. Because that's really the right answer based on their evidence. The evidence that is still undisputed. Even if you say, well, maybe those could go either way, those things you talk about. What they brought you does not constitute a criminal act of violence. Mr. Cobb told you you could rely on past behavior to predict the future. He told you that. What have they shown you about his past behavior that would lead you to believe that? Not a thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate all the attention you've paid. This has been a long, taxing couple of months, and I recognize that. We're all very tired. I appreciate everybody paying such close attention, especially through the psychiatric testimony. And I will grant you that the psychiatric testimony seemed repetitive. It seemed like you were hearing in some way the same thing over and over again. But I want you to know there was a reason why we did that. Because we had the most middle-of-the-road experts we could find, the most down-the-middle experts we could find, the most credible experts that we could find. And guess what? They all said the same thing about Brandon Daniel. Because they're middle-of-the-road guys who are going to tell it like they see it. So I apologize for what seemed repetitive, what seemed to maybe drag at some times, but it was very important for us to show you, look, we're not just making this stuff up. These are respected individuals and experts who are showing you what they're showing you. Now, I want to talk to you about the mitigation special issue, because that's an important special issue. Quite frankly, I think Brad is exactly right, and that is there is no evidence of future danger in this case at all. The government, again, has to prove there's a probability that Mr. Daniel himself will commit criminal acts of violence in prison. What evidence is there of that? Only two possible acts of violence in his past, other than our incident, are a threat to a girl when he was 11 and a fight at school when he was in high school. Those are the only two possible past acts of violence. Mr. Urgia says exactly right. What's the best predictor of the future? The past. Is Brandon Daniel's past behavior full with all sorts of violent acts? No, it is not. How do they prove a probability? Past behavior is the very best way to. How are they trying to prove this probability? Implication, innuendo. They're coming up with wild stories and silly stories, quite frankly. I kept expecting during the trial I'm going to hear some credible evidence, some credible theory about future danger. But instead I hear this silly theory that what Brandon Daniel had decided to do on this night when he'd taken 10 Xanax, and we've heard the evidence from the witness stand, you're totally out of your mind when you take 10 Xanax. You're not making any sense. You've watched the video. You've seen how he's stumbling around all over the place at Walmart. Is that a guy with a grand plan to be Mr. Columbine? Or is that a guy who whacked out of his brain and doesn't exactly know what he's doing? He popped a gun in his pocket. He had an extra magazine. I'll agree with that. That's certainly true. Does that mean he planned to become the next Columbine? Or is that sort of a wild-eyed theory that goes along with some of the other wild-eyed theories that you've heard about? Okay, now that I've covered that, I really do want to talk about mitigation, because it's very important. You've heard the government several times disparage the mitigation. Oh, all you're going to hear about mitigation is Xanax use, and that's not mitigating at all, is what they said. I think that y'all are we talked to you a lot about this in voir dire and in the jury selection, about how important it is to consider all the evidence. And we're not going to come here and say to you, there's just Xanax use. That's all you have to see. That's all you have to look at. That excuses everything. We're not coming to you to talk about excuses. We're coming to you in the same spirit that Dr. Harrell said when he was explaining to you why he came to this case at all. It's because when he heard about it in the newspaper, he had that thought in his mind, how can we make sense of such a senseless act? That's really what I think mitigation is about. How do we make sense of what is such a terribly senseless act? We can all agree that it's a terribly senseless act. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. We all have great respect for the officer. There's no question about that. But how do we make sense of that senseless act? I think that's what the mitigation story that we've brought you helps to do, tries to do, to at least in some way explain why it is that this happened. Are we trying to excuse what this happened? Are we trying to say you should just walk Brandon Daigle right out the door because it doesn't matter, it's not important? Of course not. The decision that y'all are here to answer is whether Brandon Daniel is of such a danger and has so little going for him, there's so little in his life that this young man right here just has to die. We shouldn't be forced to share the same fate with this young man because he's such a danger that he will continue being a danger and a threat to our society. He is of such little worth, and there's no mitigating factors that are sufficient to spare the young man's life. That's the decision the law asks you to make. I'll submit to you that the story of Brandon's life gives us plenty of reasons to say this person has value. This person is valued by others and loved by others for a reason, for a valid reason. And there is enough to spare the young man's life. That's really what the special issue talks about. So what is mitigation? It's whatever you decide it is. I'm going to give you a list of things. I'm going to talk about Brandon's story. But ultimately, I may miss them. I may leave something out. You know, I hope to have guidance. I hope to do my very best. I may miss something. You may see something that I don't see. You may see something that I see and you may disregard it. I think these are all important things, though, that I want to talk about Brandon. So I talked to you in the very beginning opening statement, in the guilt-innocence part of trial, about the overriding question, which is what happened to Brandon? It goes along with how do we make sense out of a senseless act. What happened to this young person who had such a promising future that he could fall so quickly, and fall so far so quickly? We try to bring you the answer to that as much as we can. Brandon, of course, was a 24-year-old computer scientist. He had graduated with honors from Colorado State, worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's computer software engineer, got this fantastic job at Harvard, has a promising future. To look at Brandon's life externally, if you didn't know Brandon, you probably would look at his life and think, oh, that guy's got everything in front of him. He's probably just on top of the world. But underneath that external view is Brandon's history of depression. Now, the government suggests, oh, that only comes from Brandon. Give me a break. You've heard multiple witnesses on the witness stand, not just our psychiatric witnesses, Jenna Phelan, Nikki, everyone who encountered him, the school records, in fact, talk about how Brandon's first suicide attempt was at age 11. That's in the written school records. You think Brandon has some great strategy going back to the age 11 to plant the idea that maybe he's depressed? No, it's because he is depressed. He's clearly depressed. That's the underlying story of Brandon's life, is that he's been depressed at least since age 11. Can you imagine what level of misery is going through an 11-year-old's mind who decides he wants to commit suicide? That's unimaginable to me. That an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, someone in that age of his life would contemplate suicide. It's difficult to even contemplate that level of pain the person must be suffering. There is evidence of a significant concussion. Again, you don't have to depend on Brandon Daniel to tell you about the significant concussion because the medical records are in evidence. The government suggests, oh, all the evidence just has to come from Brandon. Give me a break. The medical records are in records. The medical records indicate that Brandon Daniel had a significant loss of consciousness. Okay? You can look at the medical records yourself. They're very clear. They're not hard to read. It's clear he did suffer from at least one significant concussion in the records. Brandon reported other significant concussions. It's the big one that's the biggest problem. It's the repeated ones that are a bigger problem. Is there any evidence Brandon Daniel somehow got a hint that it's the series of repeated concussions that you need to explain to the neuropsychiatrist or neuropsychologist so that he'll see that you have a disorder? There's no evidence of that. I mean, and that's kind of silly, that he has some grand plan to manipulate the neuropsychologist who's been doing this for years and years and years and dealt with hundreds and thousands of patients. He knows it when he sees it. And you know that had an effect on his behavior. Very importantly, mother refuses to seek treatment at every turn. You'll see hints of that over and over again in the records. The school says, Mom, you need to seek some treatment. Mom gets mad. Mom at some point gets mad and refuses to talk to the administration. Mom at some point threatens to sue the school. It's a little unclear whether that's suing the school over the treatment or whether that's suing the school about something else. They're sort of hand in hand. Over and over again, Mom had the opportunity to seek treatment, whether it's treatment for depression, treatment for substance abuse, because there are indications in the school records that Brandon smoked marijuana at a young age. Over and over again, mother refuses to seek treatment. Now, why is that important? Am I blaming mother? Am I blaming Mary for Brandon doing what he did? No, I'm certainly not. But if we think about each of these nodes in Brandon's life, a suicide attempt, Mom could get him psychiatric treatment, psychological treatment, maybe help the young man. Instead, the response is, suck it up, deal with it yourself. The response is, I'm not going to care for you. You've got to care for yourself. So over and over again, suicide attempts, major injury, there's early treatment, there's no indication of any follow-up treatment. Over and over again, there are opportunities for the parents to intervene that just go into deaf ears. And the message to Brandon all along is, suck it up, take care of yourself. So what does he do? He sucks it up and he takes care of himself the best way he can manage. Even the state's own expert indicated some people self-medicate for depressive conditions, for other conditions, but the fact is they're liable to do it wrong. A depressive is liable to take alcohol, meds, other depressive medications, which just make it worse, quite frankly. Mother taught Brandon not to seek external treatment. Go back to the idea of the pain of life for an 11-year-old who tries to commit suicide, 13-year-old who tries to commit suicide. That young person can't face the pain of just living life. So he medicates himself. Does that justify the self-medication? No. Does it justify drug abuse? Of course it doesn't. Does it help us to understand Brandon's behavior? Combine that with the fact that Brandon's own parents are modeling this drug abuse. You heard Sherry talk about Mary, and her attitude towards marijuana was just fine. I'd really rather Brandon probably didn't drink, but he's an adult. He can make up his own mind. He's 14, 15 years old at that time. Okay? Is that the kind of parental support that is going to really lead itself to a person making good decisions down the road, especially about substance abuse? Absolutely not. So he learns to treat himself instead of seeking psychological help. This self-medication has gone bad for him in the past, of course. He develops this ecstasy habit in college. Remember, ecstasy is an upper, and he was doing really well in school. So are those two things possibly connected? That taking the ecstasy may have actually enhanced his performance at school, may have made him feel better. Gets this fantastic job at HP, comes down with Jenna to work for HP, gets really immersed in his work. Okay, so he's focusing on his work. Despite that, remember, Jenna testified that something bad would happen, he'd be knocked down, and he'd go into a complete funk. He's immersing himself in his work. He's still able to do his work, but he doesn't have access to illegal substances because he's with Jenna. He's not with anybody here local. But there's the breakup with Jenna. Jenna's a real sweet girl. Nikki is a different kind of person. It's clear that Nikki, from her testimony and her presentation, it's very clear Nikki is involved in the drug scene. very rapidly, you hear testimony both from Nikki and from Dante, the roommate, that Brandon's mental state deteriorates pretty rapidly. Now, the government's probably going to try to argue that, well, he got a promotion from work around this same time period, just a few weeks before our incident. But you remember what the timing of that was. His manager came in to say he got a promotion. That's true, but the promotion had been approved by the previous manager. So the promotion was for something probably that happened, his work probably that happened when he was still with Jenna. Okay? We've heard testimony that when Brandon hooked up with Nikki, this downward spiral did occur. That he started missing more and more work. That he started calling in late to work. Remember what Dante Davis testified to you was that Brandon told him he had the week off for spring break. They didn't have the week off for spring break. He took the week off. He kept calling and said, how do you explain that? Well, I just got the week off. Is that because he's depressed? Is that because he is taking Xanax to self-medicate? What evidence do we have that he was terribly depressed and sad on the night of our incident? Dante Davis. He said late at night, the last thing he remembers is Brandon being on the telephone with his mother crying and crying about Jim and how badly he wanted to go back. And remember that late that evening, Brandon sends that incoherent text message to Jim. That's what's going through his mind. I sure do love Jen. I wish I could have her back. My life is out of control. I'm so sad I am spiraling out of control. We brought Dr. Masters to talk to you about Xanax and why that's important, quite frankly. According to Dr. Masters, Xanax is really the perfect drug of abuse. So it's different than the experience Brandon had before, where you take ecstasy, you're still in control of your faculties, you're just kind of going faster. Instead, Xanax is different. And Brandon very rapidly developed this sort of dependence on Xanax. Why is it different? Why is it the perfect drug of abuse? Short half-life, so it hits the brain fast, and it's lipid soluble, so it dissolves and hits the brain. Okay, that's exactly where it goes. Also, why is it something that a depressive like Brandon would use? It's because of this anterograde amnesia. I take it, and going forward, I don't hurt anymore. I don't feel anymore, and I don't remember afterward. Remember, Dante Davis himself had to be 200 pounds, big guy. Well, little guy compared to me. Dante Davis, but big guy compared to Brandon. Dante Davis said, I couldn't believe the amount of drugs that Brandon was taking, the amount of Xanax that he took that night. I didn't think a little guy like him could handle that. And what did Dante Davis say his experience was of Xanax? His experience was, it made him do crazy things that he didn't remember the next day, but people were mad at him because he'd done wacky things the night before. And he decided quickly that it wasn't for him. Well, Dante Davis is clearly not a depressed guy. For a depressive guy like Brandon Daniel, dealing with the pain of life and the pain of this breakup and feeling like his life is spiraling out of control, unfortunately, Xanax is the perfect drug for him. It's also the worst kind of drug for him. What did Nikki Nance say about Brandon? Remember we talked about Dante? Dante says I would do weird things, and I'd hear about him afterward. I didn't even know I'd done it. What did Nikki say about Brandon? He would act like a different person when he was on Xanax. He would act rude and mean. Not violent. She said he was never violent, but he'd act rude and mean. You saw plenty of evidence of Brandon's pattern of Xanax use. I think that's very clear. And it's especially clear for really two reasons. You can watch the video, you see him stumbling around all over the place. Despite that, look at that, think about the blood result. His blood level was off the chart 7 hours later. Off the chart 7 hours later. What Dr. Masters testified to is that 7 hours before, he would have been unbelievably intoxicated. A normal person, Dante Davis, me, Dr. Masters, if we'd taken that level of pills, we'd be flat on our back, if not dead. Brandon Daniel had developed a bit of a tolerance to that. But still, that level he was at, he had to have been totally whacked out of his mind when he was mental. Does that forgive his behavior? Does it excuse his behavior? It does not. Is it mitigating? Obviously it's mitigating. Because but for taking that, this certainly never would have happened. I think we can all agree with that. But for his taking all those drugs, this never would have happened. Is that mitigating? I think it is. I think it's very clear that it is. Because you're not talking about whacked out on Xanax, Brandon Daniel. You're talking about this person. You're talking about the person that is going to be in the penitentiary for the absolute rest of his life. Is that person a future danger? Is that person going to get whacked out like that on Xanax and do something awful? And you say, that that's probably going to happen? Absolutely not. There's been suggestion by Dr. Morrow that Brandon's just exaggerating. He's just making up the whole business about the substance abuse. There was that clear suggestion by Dr. Morrow. What direct evidence do we have that that's not right? In addition to Nikki Nance, who's apparently, she hasn't even read her testimony from the grand jury, certainly doesn't know anything about what she said on the witness stand, and she was with him during that time period. Apparently she doesn't know about the notes he's left to himself, like this particular note, which says, "Stop effing yourself up." And how do we know that that's related to the Xanax? Because the other note that was right with it, that is step-down instructions for pills. Take this many of these days, this many of these days, this many of these days. What Dr. Masters told you is that's what addicts do. That's what people who develop a habit do. They go to the internet, they look up instructions for how to stop, and then maybe they're able to stop. They're probably not able to stop because they really need to be in a 12-step program, something to help them stop. So let's talk about the Walmart incident. What's that part of the story? I mean, that's clearly central to our story. Brandon goes to Walmart. What's his purpose in going to Walmart? If you listen to the statement, it's either to go shop or it's to go shoplift, one or the other. Is the gun related to shopping or shoplift? Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. With that hugely high level of Xanax in his brain, probably he has confused and jumbled thoughts about what his real plan is to do at that time, if he had a plan at all. He gets confronted by Padron. I would like for you to watch the video. I think that's it's ludicrous to say his plan was to go kill a police officer, was to lure a police officer by acting crazy, so that as soon as the police officer got there, he could shoot him. Why is that ludicrous? Because he could have pulled the gun out and shot him. There's no need for him to run away and get in a struggle and a tackling. He could have pulled it out, walked up to him, and shot him. Okay? If that was what he wanted to do, to be famous, he could have certainly done that. It's just, frankly, it's silly to say that that was his plan. It's goofy. Because if that's your plan, there are much better ways to do it than the way that he did it. He's not going to run off and try to run away from the officer. He's going to stand right there and shoot him. That's what he wants to do. It's clear from watching the video. Couldn't be any clearer. His intention is to escape. His intention is to get away. And then you hear his statements afterwards. Even in his statement, he says, "I thought I could escape Walmart and then everything would be fine." That, again, shows how goofy he was, how goofy his brain was not working at that time because of the Xanax. You're not going to escape the police officer. You're not going to escape Xanax. It makes no sense. But that's how his brain was working at the time. But if he wanted to kill a police officer, that was his goal. There are great ways to do that. I mean, it's a terrible thing to do. There are great ways to do that. They certainly don't match the evidence in this case. So what signs are there of remorse? Mr. Cobb has over and over again said, even from the jury selection portion, he said that there's utterly no remorse. You're going to see there's no remorse, zero remorse. What signs are there of remorse? Remember I asked witnesses, we've talked about this, does everybody show remorsefulness in the very same way? Mr. Cobb's example he kept using was, well, after they did the terrible deed, they could have called 911 immediately. They could have done first aid immediately. Obviously, that doesn't apply in our case. And Brandon is not a particularly expressive person. We've heard that from all the witnesses. It seems clear that he's a fairly introverted, not expressive person. So what signs of remorse are there? You all heard his statement. Even Detective Fugit, who's clearly very closely personally tied to this case. This case is very important to him. Even Detective Fugit admitted that at least one place on his tape, on the videotape statement, and we'll watch that in just a minute. It's only about 2 minutes long. In at least one place, he indicates his true emotion. He's respectful. He's appropriate with the detectives. He indicates, they say, what should happen to you? I should either get the life in prison, or sometimes he said the death penalty. Why is that remorsefulness? It's because it shows the wrongfulness of his actions. He knows that he's done a terrible thing. He knows from the very beginning that he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And his emotions certainly come through in that tape when he contemplates the damage that he's done. I want to listen to this if you could, Brad. Go ahead and press the play. Hopefully the sound will be clear enough.
Okay. You know he had 2 kids?
I didn't mean for that.
Okay. 2 kids that don't have their father anymore because of portobello mushrooms and onions and jalapenos. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how it sounds?
And
Somebody's son, a father, a good friend, part of a good community of police officers who's now dead because of vegetables. And we need to try to make something out of this, Brandon. We need to have something come from this. And I don't know what it is, because right now it seems pretty senseless and it seems pretty pointless. You're going from a Class C ticket that you would have gotten for shoplifting to capital murder. Do you
I understand.
see what I'm trying to wrap my brain around? Never mind yours. Never mind trying to explain this to everyone else. Trying to wrap our brains around vegetables versus a man's life. How does that make you feel?
Yes. I'm numb. I can't feel anything. I just feel horrible.
You should feel horrible, Brandon.
That's a sign of remorse. I think that's a clear sign of remorse. When he's pointed out that what a terrible thing that he's done, he puts his head down and he cries. I didn't mean that. I didn't think about that. Because he didn't think about what he did. He didn't go in there with some big plan. What else shows remorse after the fact? Remember, this is not a terribly expressive guy. What else shows remorse after the fact? This letter to Billy Little, who testified yesterday. How can God, why would God forgive me? Because what I've done is such a terrible thing. Okay? That's what he's writing to his friend. Why would God forgive me? He's not writing very clearly, I am incredibly remorseful, like he did in a different letter. But in this letter, why would God even forgive me? Because he recognizes what a terrible thing that he's done. There's the letter to Jenna. And of course, in the letter to Jenna, his statement is, I feel like I woke up in hell on Friday. He's talking about jail. My heart goes out to to Officer Padron and his family, his 2 daughters. I'm unbelievably remorseful. I'm sure the government is going to argue that either somehow this is a manufactured letter, but Detective Fugit said he recognized the handwriting of this letter. Either it's a made-up letter somehow, or it's simply there to somehow manipulate the jury. So a couple of days after he was arrested, he decided he's going to manipulate the jury in some manner. What other quotes were there in those important letters to Jenna? Look what he says here. I think this is very important. At least the inmates treat me well. Everyone's giving me the thumbs up as I left downtown. I even got a fan letter, somebody who wants to be pen pals. It kind of makes me feel worse than I already do, because I didn't mean to do anything. Is he bragging about what he's done? Does he think it's an awesome thing that he's done this to the officer? No. Right after the incident, he writes a letter to Jenna. I feel terrible. There are people here who are giving me thumbs up about this. I really feel terrible about it. That's what he says immediately afterwards. You see some evidence that's slightly different later. But what does that really mean? Is that him bragging about what he's done? Or does it really show that he's resigned himself to having to live a different kind of life? He knows immediately after he's arrested, he's going to be spending the rest of his life in prison. That's it. Whether he gets the death penalty, whether he gets life in prison, he's spending the rest of his life in prison. What do I do now? Well, I've got to adjust to my new environment. Okay? And how do you adjust to your new environment? Well, some people would adjust to their new environment by saying, I don't want to live here. I just as soon die. That's what the suicide attempt is about. That's what some of these statements are about. Maybe you should just give me the death penalty and get it over with so I don't have to live in this horrible place for the rest of my life. Because remember, it's not club-fed. Frankly, it's a horrible place. You lose virtually all of your freedoms. You don't get to decide who you associate with, who you hang around with, where you go, what you do when you're in prison. You have to do what the government tells you to do, what the jailers tell you to do. He's going back and forth about whether he would just as soon die. Is that part of why he makes these terribly rude and awful statements in the back of an ops police car? Certainly very possible. It's possible that's the Xanax talking. This statement about how he's going to be high in the prison pecking order, is that because that was his life's goal, to be high in the prison pecking order? Or instead, is it an Asian American kid who's going to have no peers in prison, full of tough, mean felons who've done horrible, violent things, and he's maybe worried that I'm going to go to prison, I'm not going to be high in the pecking order, I'm going to be at the bottom of the pecking order. A computer scientist who hasn't had to live by his fists, who hasn't had to live on the street, who hasn't had to be a tough guy to get by, a computer scientist who lives behind a computer screen, who codes for a living, rides a motorcycle for fun. My sense is he's trying to convince himself, I'm not going to be at the bottom where I'm going to be picked on. Maybe those other inmates won't pick on me because they'll look at me in a different manner. Okay? I agree. It's a cockamamie way to look at the world, but we're not talking about our world anymore. We're talking about the world that Brandon Daniel's going to live in for the rest of his life, which is the penitentiary world. Now, what about the murderabilia stuff? Again, is that him being proud of what he's done? Or is that him trying to make some sense out of his life? Is it offensive to everybody, the whole idea that you're going to sell your artwork and you've been convicted of murder? Yes, that's offensive. I agree. What is it he doing? Is he trying to really show how proud he is of what he's done? No, he's not. But is he practicing his artwork? Is he trying to make a craft? Is he trying to do better? I think he is. The last incident that I'll mention, because there's evidence about it, is the taking the bow of the day route. Again, that's offensive. I agree with that's offensive. But remember what the testimony was from the correctional officers. Daniel was sitting there playing cards, and the story comes on. They start clapping, and they egg him on. They egg him on, you've got to get up. And does he take part in some chant of F the cops? No, he doesn't. He stands up and he raises his hand and puts it down. About that long in the video. So it's tempting to blow that up into something bigger than it is. But again, here is a guy who's low on the pecking order. Here's a guy that is getting positive reinforcement from these guys. And he's not trying to brag about it, but he's egged into it. That's what the correctional officers say. Okay, so back to our psychological testimony. We gave you a lot of it. It was very important, I think. And it's all very consistent between all of our doctors that we brought you. Dr. Harrell's question, how do we make sense of a senseless act? How did he make sense of a senseless act? It's these perfect storm of factors that led Brandon to be in this cockamamie situation. He had the concussion events. We've got the medical records about that. He suffered from depression. Very common for folks with this concussion, the neurological disorder, to suffer from depression. Very common for substance abuse to go along with all that. And suicide attempts are very common in that group of people with all these other factors. The evidence tells this story. This is the simplest story to be told out of the evidence. It's a cockamamie story to say that somehow Brandon concocts all this stuff. How would he know that these are all the same concurrent factors that go together in a person with these problems? He couldn't know that. He wouldn't know that. Instead, that's something that Dr. Harrell, who was a highly respected neuropsychologist, that Mr. Cobb kept saying he and the judge are probably the two of the smartest people in the room. Super bright guy, and what he saw through his skeptical lens was very clearly Brandon has some frontal lobe inhibition issues. And these are all tied on with these other symptoms. Mr. Cobb cross-examined him very vigorously. Are you saying that that's why he killed the Honey Patrolman? Are you saying that's why he killed the officer? Are you saying that's why he killed the officer? No, but it's necessary to understand that to understand the whole person and the whole story. Why did we bring you 4 separate mental health professionals? Like I said, because they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying that Brandon Daniel was depressed. They're all saying Brandon Daniel was drug addicted. They're all saying Brandon Daniel had this series of problems that all work together. We brought you 2 psychiatrists, who are medical doctors, to say exactly that. We brought you a psychologist, we brought you a neuropsychologist, and we only brought you one psychiatrist, because the other psychiatrist is in the medical records, and she works for the state. And she has been treating Brandon for 2 years, and she said Brandon suffers from a major depressive disorder. That's very clear. Now, who did the government bring? They brought Marissa Morrow, who's been practicing for about 5 years, and she's not a PhD, she's a PsyD. She's certainly not a medical doctor. And she says, oh, no, there's just not enough evidence for me to make that diagnosis. I don't see it. Remember I talked to her about how much evidence she's got? She has way less evidence and way less information than all the other experts have, including the jail psychiatrist. But she somehow knows better than all the rest of them. Instead, what we've done is we've tried to bring in middle-of-the-road experts who all say the same thing, and that is Brandon suffered from all these same symptoms that led to his being more likely to be in a crazy situation. What specific mitigating factors then are there that we need to talk about? And we had this on a different slide in the jury selection, but I've listed these specifically for Brandon and tried to group them a little bit. Brandon was a super hard worker. Remember, he worked for USDA, made lasting contributions that will help people around the world as part of his student internship, you recall. And what he did was to bring multiple sources of information together in a way that farmers will be able to help plant their crops and plan their crops for the rest going forward. He loves Jenna. It's very clear he still loves Jenna from reading these letters, and Jenna loves him. Who else loves and cares for Brandon? Dante Davis obviously cared for Brandon. His sister Sam, Billy Little, that fantastic fellow whose wife is who goes over scriptures with Brandon, and Sherry, his aunt. There are lots of people out there who love Brandon and believe that he has value. He's a worthwhile person. There are folks out there who have nobody to love them, nobody to care for them. Brandon Daniel's not one of those people because he has worth and value. Brandon is relatively young. He certainly has the capacity to redeem himself in the future. He has the capacity to overcome this terrible situation he's been in and develop some quality of life. But is it perhaps mitigating that Mom had all these opportunities to seek help and didn't? I think maybe it would be. If she had, would we be here? Certainly I don't think we would. Can you consider that in determining whether there's enough mitigating evidence that this should be a life sentence and Brandon should be locked up for the rest of his life? I think absolutely so. The evidence of his major depressive disorder, which goes hand in hand with a neurological problem, hand in hand with the other issues we've talked about. What else is mitigating? It's a different sort of area. Whenever he's dealt with these authority figures, he's polite and he's compliant. Is that somebody who's a future danger? Is that somebody who is just defiant and is not going to get along in prison? No, that's a person who's going to do just fine when he spends the rest of his life in prison. He's certainly not a continuing threat to prison society. He's responded well to the structure. Remember what Dr. Harrell said, the way we treat folks who have this frontal lobe disorder, put them in a more structured environment. That's prison, a structured environment, highly structured environment. What else? He recognized the reality of life in prison. Dr. Morrow said it's surprising how rapidly he's adjusted to the fact that he is going to be locked up in prison for the rest of his life. What else is mitigating? Xanax, clearly mitigating. We talked about that. His actions were taken while fleeing. It's foolish to say that he was seeking out somebody to assault. That's totally foolish. It doesn't match the facts at all. It's unlikely he'll have access to this level of intoxicants in prison. Remember, the suicide attempts was somebody pocketing or cheeking their psychiatric medications, probably. But it wasn't narcotic medication. It certainly wasn't Xanax. You know, there's not Xanax that's prescribed in prison. Perhaps somebody could sneak something in. It seems pretty unlikely, quite frankly. And since Xanax is what led to this, it seems awfully unlikely that perfect storm is going to occur again. What other mitigating factors are there? You don't have to set your personal experience aside when you consider this case and what the appropriate punishment is in this case. We think about capital murder cases that deserve the death penalty, the worst of the worst kinds of cases, kind of defendants. And frankly, we have certain cases that come into our mind. Are those cases like this case? Are those defendants like this defendant? Like Brandon Daniel? Absolutely not. One of these things is not like the others, and Brandon Daniel is one of those things. Certainly that's something you can consider. Brandon Daniel has expressed remorse and has responded to psychiatric medication since he's been in jail. That's clear from the medical records, and it's clear from the psychiatrist's testimony. He's responded well to psychiatric medications. Remember that perfect storm again. Depression, drug use, those things aren't there any longer. He has responded well to the psychiatric medication. He's engaged with people like Billy Little. If you'll read the letter from Billy Little, it's clear he's looking for hope. He recognizes what a terrible thing he did. He's looking for some hope for the future or for eternity. And that shows that he is certainly capable, not just of redemption maybe going in the future, not just of rehabilitation going into the future, but he's capable of reflecting on the wrongfulness of his actions so that incarcerating him is punishment for him. It's real punishment for him because he thinks about what a terrible thing that he's done. That's why we punish people. That's one reason why we punish people. We're going to put you in jail for the rest of your life, make you think about what a terrible thing you did. So that's real punishment. Possibility of rehabilitation. I'm right toward the very end. The law allows you, each and every one of you, to look at the evidence and requires you to make your own reasoned moral response to that evidence. Okay? Looking through your own lens of morality, you get to vote your conscience. You get to decide for yourself what is mitigating and what is not mitigating. It's not me defining it for you. It's not Mr. Cobb defining it for you. Each of you gets to look and decide what's mitigating in this case. Is the mitigating evidence I've seen sufficient? I think it's very, very clear in this case that there is no way on earth that a death sentence is justifiable for Brandon Daniel. That seems very, very clear to me. You have the right to choose that life sentence for whatever reason you want. Nobody can tell you what you have to do or how you have to vote. I can't. Mr. Cobb can't. No other jurors can. Each one of you gets an individual vote. And you have to live with your conscience. That's why you have your own individual vote. Like we said, every single one of those votes is your own personal, individual, moral decision. Am I saying there is no moral blameworthiness in this case? No. Am I saying that, come on, Brandon Daniel, who was totally zoned out of his mind on Xanax, would never have done this but for being zoned out of his mind on Xanax. A kid who was doing that because of neurological deficits, long-standing terrible depression, that he's trying to self-medicate with the Xanax. That's clearly mitigated. Brandon's life story is clearly mitigated. There are people who love Brandon, who you've heard from, who think and believe that he's a worthwhile person. Even our psychologists, psychiatrists, testified that they had to get to know him before they even decided if he's worth coming here to work for. Maybe Brandon Daniel is such a criminal mastermind that he's fooled all those people. Or maybe the truth is that Brandon Daniel is a worthwhile person. Brandon Daniel is not a person whose life has no value and no meaning, and who is so violent that we just can't share this earth with him. Because that's really what the law requires you to decide. You have to decide that he's such a threat of danger, future danger, that he will be a threat to society. You have to, in order to kill him, you have to decide that there are no redeeming qualities such that we should spare his life. The evidence is very clear in this case. I really appreciate you paying attention. I'm very confident that on that first question, the future dangerousness question, it's a fairly easy no. He's not a future danger. And I'm certainly confident that if you get past that first question, yes, there's very clearly mitigating factors, such that the life sentence is appropriate in this case. I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate you paying attention. Thank you.
Friends and family, brothers, sisters, I'm all behind the drone. So it appears that even at this late stage, we have failed to convince defense attorneys that their clients should be appropriately punished. Fortunately, that's not our job. What our job is to convince you as jurors, people who came into this case with an open mind, who came into this case to speak as the voice of the community. Now, here's the bad thing about a case like this. You spend 2 weeks, and actually it's closer to 2 months, because when you take all the voir dire into account, talking about the defendant. You forget that in this community, there has to be a certain balance. And now it's been unbalanced because we lost a community member. Let's talk about what we lost before we talk about what is necessary to do. And I didn't say what would be easy to do. I know for the defense attorneys, making a decision on the future danger issue is really easy. Just say no, send their client to prison, where with his lack of impulse control, he'll do whatever he wants to, according to their expert. But that's an easy answer for them, because it serves their interest. But let's talk about what's going to be hard to do later. But let's talk about what the community has lost. Because you have two individuals here. You have one who, all of his life, he's been trying to pretend that he is somebody who will follow the rules and do good in our society. Everybody he talks to, he wants them to know that. What's the term he always uses? I can't think of. Not a credit to society, but some kind of outstanding member of society. He said it so often it should be stuck in my head. He didn't live that life, but that's how he wanted to present himself. That's how he wanted to manipulate things so that people who came in contact with him would believe that. Jaime Padron, when he was 17 years of age, signed up to serve our country. In wartime. Now think about how astonishing that is. In wartime. And he didn't join the National Guard or some other military service where he wouldn't get shipped overseas. He joined the Marines. And the Marines are always the first to go. Everybody knows that. If you want to go defend our country's interests, regardless of what you think about that war, he went believing he was defending our country's interests. He went and survived a war in the desert, and then came back and decided he wanted to serve his community. And his sister talked about how most of his life, over half of his life, he was doing community service. He joined the police department and rose up through the ranks. Eventually becoming a detective. He worked in the gang units, trying to keep the gangs out of his community. And he worked in the narcotics unit, which is kind of ironic, given the defendant's history of narcotics use and being involved in the drug culture in Colorado to the extent of, according to him, he helped bring down some drug kingpin. That I assume is true. But Detective Padron worked with San Angelo Police Department and eventually came here to Austin because his wife moved here for a job. And he sacrificed and came here and decided he wanted to work in the police department here. And he did that. And you heard about his relationship with his family, with his father and his mother, with his brother, even up to the end, being in contact with his brother, talking about, I'm divorced from my wife now, but I have a new lady in my life, and I'm going to bring her up next week to meet you. That's how important family and community was for him. He could have left the police department, taken a job with his brother, making more money, being part of that family business, but he didn't. He loved police work. Remember how in San Angelo he went into a burning building to save 2 kids, and unfortunately they didn't save the kids. Then he ran back a second time into a burning building to save a police officer, fellow officer. That's the kind of person Jaime Padron was. That brings us to April 6th of 2012. You know why Jaime Padron was at the Walmart. Because there was a call of a drunken shoplifter, and he responded to that call. And he didn't think there was a threat. Because that's the mistake people always make with the defendant. They don't think there's a threat. What was the defense attorney said? If you want to judge someone's what they're going to do in the future, look at what they've done in the past. And I think halfway through that, he realized that he's talking about somebody who's been convicted of killing a police officer. So if you want to judge what he's going to do in the future, understand that he has killed a police officer. And I know when you first heard this, if you hadn't followed it in the news before, you probably thought there would be something kind of odd or strange about the circumstance of perhaps maybe there was a shootout at a bank or something like that, or some kind of chase where he was shooting back and shot the officer. I bet you never knew it was going to be just a cold-blooded assassination, which is exactly what it was. A cold-blooded assassination. Mr. Bishop is totally right. Look at what was going on that night. The defendant already told his roommate that he wanted to rob a convenience store. I don't know why he would want to do that. And he told him, I've gotten away with worse shit. I don't know what else that guy has done. None of us know. But we know what he was bragging about having done. They say that in those school records, it doesn't show a history of violence. Actually, it does. In the disciplinary records, look at it. He's assaulting girls, and not just the young lady we brought in here where he threatened her. There's other incidents in there. He didn't get in a fight with another boy. He sucker punched the boy and then hit him repeatedly until there was a puddle of blood around him. All that's in the record. There's other stuff in there if you want to look through it. There's other stuff in there. So think about that day where he shows up at the Walmart. They have spent so much time in this case talking about intoxication. Okay, he was intoxicated. Many people are intoxicated. Not only is it not a defense to committing murder, it doesn't excuse you after you've been convicted of murder. It doesn't reduce your moral blameworthiness because you yourself decided to take those drugs. But he's been doing that all of his life. And it really hasn't had a big effect on him. It didn't even keep him from driving his motorcycle to the store, which would seem to be a very dangerous thing, difficult to do. It's not like driving a car where if you lean a little bit, you're okay. He was able to get there safely, walk around, go in and out, get all of his stuff, and he didn't seem to be shoplifting. He seemed to just kind of be waiting. What did he go outside for? Did he go outside to check and see if the police had arrived yet? Because if he wanted to shoplift and get away with shoplifting, and he's been a thief before, as he knows the police will eventually be called. But if you wanted to get away with shoplifting, just run away from the loss prevention people there. He said he took his gun there in case someone tried to stop him, in case he said a cop tried to stop him. He wanted to be ready. He would use the gun to scare the cop. Now, a gun might scare a loss prevention person. You know, in our society, we sometimes are very critical of police until we need police. Then we're less critical. When we hear gunshots fired, we do like those people did at the Walmart. We run for cover. We grab our loved ones and go hide. But what the cops do is they run to the gunshots. And that's what we count on. So when he talks about, I'm going to pull that gun out and scare the police officer, well, I expect to try to stop me, he must have understood, given that he's worked with cops before, that that was not going to scare a police officer. That was going to be a gunfight, if that's what he's interested in. So think about that. And think about how when he went there with the gun, he went there not just with one clip, which would have been sufficient to scare a police officer if that's going to happen, but he went there with 2 clips, as if he had plans to fire until this clip was empty, and then put the second clip in and use that. Why else would you have 2 clips unless you had something else planned? You know, they talk about, he said that he was going to go on anniversary of Columbine and jump off the tallest building, but they left out the other part that we actually read to you, so I'm sure you remember, where one of his classmates said that the plan that he and the other kid had was in 7th period to turn the school into a Columbine. Turn the school into a Columbine. That's different. Because it seemed like what he was planning to do was turn the Walmart into a Columbine. See, it's difficult sometimes for us who would not commit crimes, who would never think about assassinating a police officer, to imagine why someone would do that. So think about how he was so ready to kill that officer. Mr. Bishop is right. They hit the floor and the shots were firing. It wasn't that he had to find his gun somewhere. He was running with his hand on the gun. And remember how they found a live bullet there at the scene that was just there at the scene? It came from here. It's because when he was running, he already had the gun round chambered in the gun. But he forgot about it. He chambered another round, and that round dropped out. But he was ready to shoot the officer and shot him immediately. He was there for, what, 30 minutes in the store? Officer Jaime Padron was there for about a minute. That's the entire time he was there, from getting out of his vehicle, meeting with the Walmart associate, walking to where the defendant, after waiting there for 30 minutes, decided that that was the moment when the officer showed up, that he needed to walk directly to the officer and then start running with his hand on his gun, because he all along planned to kill that officer. And again, we can't imagine that, but think about what he did after killing that officer. He didn't cry, he didn't get sad, he wasn't remorseful, he was never remorseful about it. I don't care how you interpret it. First thing he said when he laid on that floor after he tried to shoot the other associates, and they took the gun from him, and he just gave up. He laid back and rested. He said, I killed the cop. That's exactly what he said. And they cross-examined that witness because they said, oh, you didn't tell anybody that. And then in the car, you hear him say, I killed a cop. He gets to the police station, said, I killed a cop. He's telling everybody who's listening, he's not being sad about it, he just says, I killed a cop. And they spent so much time not wanting to believe he knew what he was doing. Remember all that stuff they told you about Xanax and now it's brain damage and all that other stuff? They believe all the crazy stuff he says about falling at 18 months and hitting bumping his head. They don't believe him when he says, I knew what I was doing. How proud was he? Remember when he got in jail? He had a clipping, a newspaper clipping from his cell. Remember how he talked about, based on the crime I committed, I'm at the top of the pecking order when I go to prison. I'll sell my story for $100,000. Hi, big joke. So he doesn't think like the rest of us. They think that the murderabilia is some kind of adjustment to prison life. No, that's an intent to profit from murdering a police officer. I killed a cop. I'm about to get rich on killing a cop. That's what that is all about. So when we talk about getting balance back into our community, that's what we're talking about. Look at what we have lost. Look at what he has cost us, and now he plans to profit from that. Yeah, prison is an awful place. This man has adjusted very well to prison, and he already enjoys it. Prison to him is no different. What was it he said in the car? Well, this is after he had killed a police officer and is being driven to the police station. He says, I guess I don't have to work anymore. Somebody else is going to pay for my food. And later on, what does he say in the letter? It was a letter to Jenna, I guess. Living the dream. Retired at 25. He's not concerned about prison life because he knows in prison, whereas we frown on people who kill police officers, in prison, those criminals, those murderers, rapists, and robbers who have fought with the police all of their life, they think that's a good thing. That's something that they would have wanted to do if they'd only had the courage to do it. No, the idea that Xanax made him kill that police officer, now that's a crazy thing that they keep saying, but that's exactly what they keep saying. It was the Xanax that made him do it. It could have been Ambien until we tested and found out he didn't have Ambien in his system. But remember, that was his defense. So it's just anything. It's just anything. Role of jurors. You remember how when we were doing voir dire and we talked so much about whether in the proper case you could vote in such a way that the death penalty would be imposed? See, none of you had to end up serving on this jury. We told y'all over and over, we called 400 people. Now, are you sure that in the right case you can make a vote that will guarantee, we told you in Texas, when the death penalty is imposed, the person is executed. We didn't try to sugarcoat it. We wanted you to understand this is not California or some state where they can sit on death row, but that if you make the right vote, the defender will be executed. You said, yes, sir, I can do it. And I said, are you sure? You said, yes, sir, in the right case, I will follow the law and the evidence and do it. And I know how it is with death penalty cases, because I handle death penalty cases. I know that jurors, citizens have this main concern, that criminals are getting away with too much and we might be victimized. That's what you have when you're out in the community. But when you're on a juror, you have a completely different concern. Your concern is that Michael Morton issue, that a person might be wrongfully convicted and sent to prison for a long time, and God forbid, the worst thing happened, that a person who is wrongfully convicted, I'm going to read in the newspaper one day, a person was wrongfully convicted and I was involved with it, and they're going to be executed or they get executed. That's why you want to be absolutely sure before you make the decision. Can you be any more sure than you are in this case? That's why we bring so much evidence to you. Will there ever be a time when someone say, no, they got the wrong person, the defendant was somewhere else when this happened? No, we have them on video doing it. We have them captured immediately after. We have the gun being taken out of his hand. We have DNA evidence on the gun. We have the victim's DNA evidence on him from when he shot him, and the blood splashed back into his face. There will never be a time when someone will come and say the DNA evidence has shown someone else did it. You can be absolutely 100% sure that you will never, ever have any question about whether this is the person who killed Officer Jaime Padron. So you don't need to worry about some wrongful conviction. It is impossible. So now, what is the proper punishment in this case? And that's what we're going to talk about. Remember, what you promised to do is follow the law. Follow the law and the evidence. Not let emotions affect you. We've had family members in the courtroom, and I remember on the first day there was something awful. It may not have been too awful, but they reacted emotionally. And we sat them down. We said, we understand that, but you can't do that. We don't even want to give the appearance that we're trying to unduly influence jurors. You notice there are a few police officers in the room? Don't you know that this room could be filled to overflowing with police officers if we wanted to try to intimidate you in some way? But we're not going to do that. What we're going to ask is that you do what you promised to do, which is follow the law and the evidence in the case. And you all agreed and you took an oath that you would do that. And if you do that, you're going to vote in such a way that the death penalty will be imposed on this defendant. Remember that term confluence or morbidity that came from Dr. Harrell, I believe. He said it over and over. Even when I tried to stop him, he said it over and over. And I want to talk to you about some of that confluence of morbidity. I was thinking earlier today how if you voted in such a way that the defendant got life in prison, and he went down to TDC and he was sitting around with his new friends down in TDC, how he would explain to them how a jury gave him life in prison after he assassinated a police officer. And he would explain to them this whole concept of a confluence of morbidity. But it requires quite a bit, and I want to talk to you about that. For instance, one thing it requires is that he has a mom that he can blame. Because it's all about deciding why he did what he did. So the first step is the mom who dropped him or let him fall when he was 18 months old, and he hit his head and got a brain injury. The mom who let him use drugs, and the mom who was a drunk, and the mom who was an alcoholic and who was a drug abuser, the mom who was overbearing when she needed not be, the mom who was always there but never there, and the mom who, when he needed help, threatened to file a lawsuit against him, which we now all realize that last part was a total lie. She never threatened a lawsuit for them telling her she needed to get help for him. And there was no way you could make that mistake by reading that part of the report. And isn't it interesting that both of their experts made the same mistake, the exact same mistake, Dr. Harrell and Dr. Scott, and insisted on it. And when we showed it to Dr. Scott, he says, well, it must have been somewhere else, and we waited for him to find it, and he didn't bother looking for it because it didn't exist, because the defendant told him that he just believed it. He didn't check it. He wasn't skeptical and all of that. So it's this bad mom who is to blame. Or maybe it's Jenna. Remember how when we first started, their whole defense was he broke up with Jenna, and that set him into a downward spiral and went to a dark place. So based upon that, he took Xanax and tried to kill her. Now remember, Jenna broke up with him in December, and it turns out that he kicked her out. And remember what happened after he kicked her out? Was he pining away waiting for her? No, he put an ad in Craigslist in December, and by early January, he had a new roommate. He wasn't waiting for her to come back. Also in December, he had a new girlfriend. That's when Nikki became involved. So Jenna sent him into using drugs heavily. He's used drugs heavily all of his life. That's what Jenna says. All of his life, he was using cocaine and mushrooms and PCP and everything out in Colorado before he got here. I don't know if that's true or not. But it's true. It's true all of his life. It was true before he broke up with her. It was true after. Always been true. So blame Mom, blame Jenna. Don't forget Nikki. Because remember Nikki, the new girlfriend, she's the one that got him hooked on Xanax, or whatever that means, getting hooked on Xanax. And he was still using all these other drugs and drinking a lot. But going to work, he didn't miss a week of work for spring break or anything else. He missed 2 days that week, and one day was the day he was killing Officer Jaime Padron. And he missed the day before. He hadn't had any work-related issues in that downward spiral. It just didn't exist. And then, of course, you blame Aunt Sherry. The poor thing, she said, if I'd only known when he was there with me, when I didn't have any problem with him, didn't notice any problem, if I'd only known there were so many problems in his home, I could have done something. I could have changed things. And it turns out that the problems she believed existed were problems they told her existed. That this woman who was a police officer, then a police detective, and then the elected district or county attorney who had lots of experience in dealing with mental illness, lots of experience in dealing with people who were using drugs, didn't notice any of those problems in her family with her sister and her brother-in-law. In fact, says her sister doesn't like to drink. And her brother-in-law was not a drinker. Remember how Dr. Scott decided that after they stood up and said that Ken Daniels had cirrhosis of the liver because he was an alcoholic, Dr. Scott says, well, I met with him and he wouldn't talk to me. Well, it turns out he couldn't talk to him. That man was in court for a couple of days looking like death, warmed over. He was not able to come back. Don't you think he would have been here to support his son if he was physically able? So he wasn't able to do an interview with Dr. Scott because the man is dying. But Dr. Scott, because he wanted to believe the defendant, said, oh no, he doesn't have that hereditary liver disease. It may not have been liver disease, but he doesn't have that hereditary disease he claimed to have. He must have cirrhosis of the liver related to his alcoholism that he's in denial about. That's because that's how much they want to believe every single thing this defendant says, even though there's no evidence to support it. No evidence. We'll get later to talk about the last person involved in this confluence of morbidity. Let's talk about what defense attorneys knew versus what the defendant told them. You know why they are so focused on proving that he didn't know Jaime Padron before the night he killed Jaime Padron? Because it makes him look bad. It makes him look like when in the store, despite the Xanax, he immediately recognized Officer Jaime Padron, didn't care about him, and shot him. Remember, there are two people he said that night that he knew. One person was Officer Knott. And Officer Knott testified. Yeah, he asked me if I remembered him, and I said yes, and Officer Knott told the circumstances of it. So that night when the defendant said that he knew Officer Knott, that was absolutely correct. Officer Knott had arrested him on a DWI. They had conversed. And if you ever want to get a clear picture of how manipulative he is, look at that DWI video. Officer Knott, y'all remember that? How he was in the back negotiating with Officer Knott. Can't you do something for me? I used to work with in Colorado as an informant. Can you do something to help me get out of this? All about helping you get out. So he did know Knott, but they're fighting so much that he knew Officer Jaime Padron. Whether it was 2 days before when Officer Jaime Padron was at his apartment door checking on his roommate's vehicle, and they very well may have had a conversation, or sometime before that. You know, if it's kind of unimportant matter, officers don't do offense reports on it. But it was clear, even though they didn't want to believe him, that he knew Officer Jaime Padron on the night that he killed him. He didn't know him after he shot him, he knew him already. We'll talk about that in a second. Look at what the defendant said. If you want to know also what a kind of manipulative person he is, remember that last video we played yesterday with his sister, where he was trying to get his sister to do something for Jenna something with Jenna, tell her some secret message that he wouldn't say on the phone, 2 sentences, and she was so hesitant to do it because clearly it was something illegal. Who knows what it was, or what kind of consequences could have come from that. But God bless her, she wouldn't do it, but he had her in tears, manipulating her to try to get her to do something she clearly didn't want to do. And what does Jenna say when she comes out? She doesn't remember it. So if it was something that important, surely she would have remembered, or she doesn't want to tell us about it. Look at Dr. Harold and his traumatic brain damage. They love their Dr. Harold, doesn't they? He's so well respected. He's been doing this for years and years. And he says that he made a determination that the defendant has traumatic brain damage. Isn't it interesting that we didn't hear about that brain damage at all during the guilt innocence stage of the trial? It was all Xanax, Xanax, Xanax. And then when the defense attorney stood up and talked to you about what evidence would be shown during punishment, never mentioned that brain damage, did it? Now all of a sudden their whole case is brain damage. Let's look at the brain damage. What evidence out there is there of brain damage? First of all, let me say something about Dr. Harold. When I said that, other than the judge and Dr. Harold, the defendant was the smartest person in the courtroom, I was being facetious. I don't think Dr. Harold was one of the smartest people in the courtroom. You know, just because you're highly educated, it doesn't make you an intelligent person. I'm not trying to say he was an ignorant person, but the fact that he was so willing to ignore all the evidence and come to a conclusion regarding the traumatic brain damage. Remember how he came to that conclusion? He said history. Now I've gotten 2 sources that say he fell and had a concussive incident as an 18-month-old. It turns out all they have is 1 source. Then he talks about the really big event was the skateboarding incident. And you can see where I was going because I was asking him, well, y'all have the ability to do CAT scans, right? You can look at a person's brain. We have the technology. Yeah, but we don't do that. I don't do that. Yeah, I know people can do that. We could have had those tests ordered. But what he says is that even though when he had the skateboarding accident, that they did a CAT scan and the CAT scan showed no brain damage, to me that was indicative of brain damage. That makes no sense. But he says that when I interviewed the defendant, I gave him a sniff test. He sniffed some things on paper, and the responses of him sniffing on that paper was that he had traumatic brain damage. That was enough for Dr. Harold. Let's just start with, but not that it would matter, because there's people who know him, his aunt, Jenna, Nikki, nobody else saw any evidence of brain damage in his life. Nobody. But it's based totally on what he said. Now think about Dr. Carter. I think Dr. Carter was an excellent witness who told you the truth about everything he was asked about. What I thought was really interesting is on this key issue of future danger. Dr. Carter, who's dealt with that issue before, has tested people on that issue before. When he interviewed the defendant, he was told, don't test him for future danger. What are they afraid of Dr. Carter, their witness, finding him and coming in and truthfully telling you? Told him, Dr. Carter knows how to do it, he's done it in the past, do not test him and don't talk to his mom to get information. Dr. Carter says the important thing about his personality is if you will leave him alone, that's his attitude is, if you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But if somebody messes with him, he'll mess with them back. And we know what happened when Officer Padron messed with him. What do you think is going to happen in prison? When people mess with him and tell him what to do and where to go and when to eat, because that's what prison is about. But both of those experts assured us of this. And although he has an impulsive behavior disorder or something like that, as long as you don't have these certain factors present that confluence of morbidities, as long as you don't have these certain factors present, he'll never commit a crime again. He will not be violent. That's what they said. So as long as he doesn't get drugs and alcohol in prison, then everybody's safe. But if he does get drugs, alcohol in prison, yeah, he could kill again. So I guess they didn't know that it's pretty easy to get drugs and alcohol in prison. Because maybe didn't they know that even here in the Travis County Jail, he got drugs and alcohol. Within months after killing Officer Jaime Padron under the influence of drugs and or alcohol, that he's again getting drugs and alcohol, that in prison he would get all the drugs and alcohol. Sad to say, but in prison he would get all the drugs and alcohol he desires to get. If he doesn't want to use them, he doesn't have to, and then we'll all be safe, or the people in prison will be safe. But do you believe that he will not take advantage of the opportunity to get drug and alcohol in the prison? I talked to you about how you will never see a newspaper story that will say, we got the wrong person in this case. 10 years down the road, 20, you will not. But if you send him to prison on a life without parole, and he gets his hands on some drugs and alcohol, you will see a headline. Cop killer kills again. That's why we show you the video of what it's like in prison. Those guards aren't armed. They're sitting ducks if someone wants to kill them. What they count on is that people will control their impulses. And most do, who can. So if you're okay with him being in that prison environment and not getting drugs and alcohol, then fine, there's not going to be a future danger. But you're not okay with that. Because as he's shown since being in the Travis County Jail, he will use drugs and alcohol. Absolutely he will. That's just him. He's going to do what he wants to do. I think this is important to show not only lack of remorse, but how he continues to live his life. Remember his statement about the pecking order? The memorabilia, that was just a few months ago. When was that, December? Where he's talking to his mom, they're trying to set up a way to use his artwork. He uses that term. He knows exactly what it is. So he's going to profit from this officer's death, if you allow him to. And this unbelievable remorse, that's the word they use in that letter. I don't know where that letter came from. How is it that she got a letter that we were not able to see coming out of the jail? That just wouldn't happen. We got copies of every single letter. We get every phone call. We know every movement that goes through normal channels. We know he was trying to send stuff through inmate mail or maybe media mail too. We know he had these secret codes, which they think these codes are kind of funny because it says, hi mom or something like that. But it's not really funny. It's not really funny. Because the point is, there's a secret code that they're building that they can send messages that we can't monitor. Does that make you feel safe about what he might do in the future? The escape plan he had, I don't know about if that witness got his escape plans mixed up, if he had more than one escape plan. It doesn't matter. The fact is he was clearly making plans, which he will continue to make. Do you think the officer lied when he said that he saw the paper with the name of the jailers on it and their habits? You thought he made that up? He said he took it and turned it into his chain. What his chain did with it, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that officer lied about it. We already talked about that. Dr. Carr says as long as you remove those factors, drug and alcohol, then he'll be fine. Talked about that. Let's look at some of the issues, some of the mitigation factors that are not present. We get a lot of people up here who do really bad things because some of them have grown up in really bad households. They've been sexually abused, physically abused. Maybe they've been poor and hungry all of their life. They make bad decisions because they're trying to get something that they never could have. He didn't have any of that. He had the best household. I know they're trying to dog his mom and dad now because it serves a purpose, his purpose. Trying to get away with this. But the truth is, as Aunt Sherry said, they had a good household. The mom gave him a little too much freedom because she wanted him to be independent. She was too indulgent with her kids. That's not a bad thing. She didn't beat her kids. She apparently once made him walk around with a backpack full of books. If that's your big complaint about childhood, that's okay. You'll see in the school records that anytime he got in trouble at school, and he was always getting in trouble at school, she came up there to deal with it. and she dealt with it appropriately. But she was indulgent with him. So all those things that may be ordinarily mitigating factors just aren't present here, aren't present. Think about what you're going to say about your verdict. Because you see how many people have been in this courtroom. You know, the community has a great deal of interest in what's going to happen with this case. And it's not just police officers who are interested, it's people who are in stores who are interested, it's people all around who are interested in what you as the voices of our community think is a proper verdict in this case. And it's never an easy thing to come to a verdict in a death penalty case. But you must come to a verdict in this case, an appropriate verdict. And your verdict will say what price someone has to pay if they, under these circumstances, where they committed a cold-blooded murder of a police officer. They show up to court with 100 different excuses about why they did it. And they find every woman in their life to blame for why they did it. The mom, Jenna, Nikki, and Sherry. Every single woman in his life, he's blaming for this. With the exception of one last person who he blames for it, who's not a woman. You have to say yes to the future danger issue. You have to decide if there's sufficient mitigating circumstances. And really, once you get past what he said regarding the brain damage, the bad parents who are alcoholics and drug users, not only is there not sufficient mitigating circumstances, there's not really any mitigating circumstances. Getting drunk and going to commit a crime, if that was it, we don't punish people if that's it. I mean, and the drugs didn't make them do it. Plenty of people on Xanax who don't go with a gun and 2 clips and put the gun up to the police officer's neck and pull the trigger causing his death. Or the police officer you knew. That doesn't happen just because of Xanax. So Xanax is not a mitigating factor. Now think about what cost this has to society. Some people say that, you know, in death penalty cases we shouldn't do it because the monetary costs are so high. That's true. Monetary costs are high. But think about what would be the cost if we don't impose the death penalty in this case. And he kills again. Because some of those factors are present. They say that if we send him to prison, he'll be there so long that his father will have passed away and his mother and his sister will have grown up and maybe had grandkids. That's true. He will be there that long. And think what else if you send him to prison for a life without parole, what else would go on? You know who pays for the price of it? Who pays for him to be retired at 25 and living the dream? Who pays for him not to have to work anymore? We as taxpayers do. We do that, so for the rest of his life, we'll pay those costs. So even after we're all dead, if he's still living in prison, we'll pay that. But you know who else will be paying that but other taxpayers? Henry Jones' daughters. Isn't that just an odd, crazy thing to have happened? The man who murdered your father in cold blood, you will, as an adult, once you start paying taxes, you will pay for his room and board as long as he lives. You will pay for him to be able to watch TV, and as that Mr. Rogers said, eat his Bluebell ice cream. You will pay for him to be at the top of the pecking order in the prison. And that's just unfair. It's unfair that Honey's father has to be without his son because kids should never die before their parents. That's unfair. And for you to think now that we do something for him because he wants us to again do something for him, and isn't that what this whole case has been about? All these witnesses in there talking about how we can save him, can he be redeemed? This is about doing what's right for our community and deciding what is the price if someone assassinates a police officer. And what message do you send to the community? This is from the in-car video when Officer Knott was driving him to the police station. And I showed you this before. They talk so much about how much remorse he has, even though he clearly does not. He says to those officers, Are you guys pissed that I kept one of your other friends? So we call that not remorse, but we call that bragging about what you've done. And he says, well, if there's any consolation, I've met him before. They don't want to believe that he knew this officer. But their client is telling them, if they will just listen, just like he was telling them all along, I knew it was a police officer. I tried to kill the
I
police
object
officer.
to the prosecutor striking with the defendant over the shoulders of the defense counsel. That's exactly this type of argument that's in place.
You did not. That's exactly how the evidence shows.
5 minutes.
They don't want to. They've been telling you that he didn't know it, he told them, I knew it. Why don't they believe that? They believe all the craziness about the brain damage and all the other craziness. Oh yeah, so he did know that officer. They don't want to admit that until you do. So let's look finally. He calls the officer a dipshit and says, I'm glad he's dead. He's never stopped being glad he's dead other than in that letter that was written. Sometime, I imagine after the trial started, and got delivered to Jenna. Because if you believe her lie about I received 2 letters in the same envelope that somehow got through Travis County Security, then we're all very golden. Can you play that, Bill? I just want you again to look at the video, and they mentioned this, the video of when he had made an appearance after he had killed Officer Jaime Padron. He had been in court, and he had come back to the Travis County facility, and then all the prisoners had been sitting around, and a news story came on that got everybody's attention. I don't know what station this is on. This is about 9 o'clock at night. They got everybody's attention. You can see everybody, there he is right there going by to make sure he can get a good sight of the story about him. And they're basically saying Brandon Daniel, who's charged with killing an Austin police officer in the Walmart, had a court appearance today. And then they no doubt are showing some videos of him being in court. And the prisoners are enjoying this. Because it's just a cop that he killed. Putting him at the top of the pecking order in the Travis County Jail. And they're enjoying this. And remember, he takes a bow, but to them it's just a small bow, so it's not really like he's enjoying this. They kind of egged him on into taking a bow for killing those 2 girls' dad. For killing a man who served our country, he took a bow. Because he knows everything about Officer Jaime Padron at this point. Because you know he keeps up with the news stories. And then somebody yells out, "Fuck the police." Now he didn't lead a chant of "fuck the police," but you can see on the video what he does is "fuck the police." That's right, because I killed a cop. And what's the Travis County grand jury going to do about that? Remember how he inquired immediately after arrested? Am I in Williamson County or Travis County? He hadn't been in this area very long, but he seemed to think that would make a difference where he murdered the police officer at. As if one county would value the life of that police officer more than another county. Are you going to answer that question for you? See, think about the cost involved in this. You actually have to answer 3 questions when you go back there. You're going to answer future danger, and he is a future danger, because he will have those other factors present in the future. And all that stuff they've made up is not sufficient mitigation. But the way you answer those questions will answer a 3rd question for all of our community, all the family members of Officer Jaime Padron, which is, in these circumstances, for a person who has lived the kind of life he's living, been given so many advantages, but that person who has always kind of mocked the police, who after killing Officer Jaime Padron has profited and will continue to seek the profit, who has felt exalted by being at the top of the pecking order. Everybody will know whether you think Officer Jaime Padron's life is worth the same as this man. Because somebody who has decided they
I'm sorry, I have to object that this line of argument, it's specifically against the rules and against case law to argue that one life is worth more than another. Exactly the argument Mr. Cobb's making, that's inappropriate.
I'm making the opposite argument. I'm making the opposite argument. Let's be clear. No life is worth more than another. But once you make the decision to take a life, you don't get to decide that it's best that you continue living. And every day that you allow him to live, and we have to pay for it, and Jaime Padron's daughters have to pay for it, and the other police officers and other citizens, and all of those who care in this community have to pay for him to not work and live the dream and be retired at 25, that's a shame. And if that is what passes for justice in this community, we should tear that flag down, and we should blow up this courthouse, because that is wrong. But I know you're not going to do that. I know you're going to go back there and make the right decision. When you come back and announce that decision, your community will thank you.
Yes, ma'am.